In this portion of my lecture, I'm going to talk primarily about the publishing process and some of the ethical quandaries that I encountered here. This is the majority of the proposal letter that I wrote, and I presented this when I was looking for an agent and later when I was looking for a publisher. So I started off thinking that I wanted an agent. I was actually able to procure a New York agent. I went to a conference for this. I presented this proposal letter as well as a book proposal, and this agent liked what I had to say. And then later, I heard that there was an imprint at the U of A Press that covered international aid and development in Africa. And I heard that their acquisitions editor, I believe he was born in Namibia and then spent a long time in South Africa, and was very interested in some of these themes that I was covering in this book. And I thought at that point that maybe I wanted to just publish with a publishing house and not have an agent at all. And so I was able to get out of my contract with my agent and ended up going with U of A Press. But let me go through this with you just a little bit. Proposal letters or query letters tend to have the same parts, and it's just going to vary depending upon what you're proposing. Here in the first paragraph, I have a hook. I give a little teaser about what the book's about, and I have a hook that I think is engaging. When Memory Chizeza chose to volunteer for a small Canadian-sponsored girls' school, instead of marrying like her peers, she was ridiculed and called a lazy, worthless girl. Now I look at that and I think I'd like to tighten it up, but be that as it may. So this first paragraph is the hook, and it tells the what. Then I go to the second paragraph. Using Memory's story as its framework, A Light in the Warm Heart of Africa combines an evocative anecdotal women's history with an easy-to-read commentary on the social challenges and paradigms that face Malawian women, through a combination of fact and narrative. So this is the how. This is how I am going to write this book. The next paragraph places the book within the market. This is a timely topic. We are all more aware of international issues. Books like Romeo Dallaire's Shake Hands with the Devil, and more recently, They Fight Like Soldiers, They Die Like Children, as well as Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, have topped the bestseller lists, while Madonna has brought a peculiar sort of fame to this once obscure country. So I've placed it within the market. This is always really important. You need to know what are the current titles that are similar but different from what you are proposing. Now here in the next paragraph, I give compelling reasons why me and how I am doing this. So to learn about the country and its people, I've traveled there 3 times, blah, blah, blah. And then I also give a little bio. Again, why me? What do I have to offer? This is very typical of a proposal letter. And so when I realized that I wanted to get U of A Press to publish my book, I submitted that, and I submitted this book proposal. Now this was pages and pages long, and I'm not going to show it to you. I would probably change a few things nowadays, but let me go through this. The book concept, similar to what's in the proposal, but expanded upon. Audience, why am I writing this book and why now? And then very specifically, who will buy this book? And you need to, as the author, really nail this. So you need to know who will buy your book and the specifics of that, because that's who the publisher wants to know, that you've put some thought into this and that you understand your audience. So your audience is never everyone. Who is your audience specifically? Now, this first category is more precise than it looks. Readers with an interest in Africa. What does that mean? Well, it means something different now than it did then, I think. Malawi particularly had some very close ties to Canada when I was researching and writing this book. Some of those ties are no longer there. When Stephen Harper took over the government, he dissolved the embassy, the Canadian embassy in Malawi. And things really changed after that. Also, at that time, there were a lot of people, I would say, traveling back and forth from Malawi, Canadians. I don't know why, maybe because it was one of the poorest countries, and there were a lot of international aid, NGOs at that time, and so, not that there aren't now, but it's a little bit of a different relationship now, I think. Anyway, there were a lot of people at that time who had a very vested interest in, now I've said Africa, but really I'm talking about Malawi and a few other countries that were particularly vulnerable, and people were flooding them with various kinds of international aid. So this was an important group, and of course in the proposal I explain that. People who are interested in women's issues and global education for girls. Atsakanapao Lendo supporters. Atsakanapao Lendo is the name of the school that Memory built. And my own following. Now, today, I would probably work more on my following, and I would probably try to get that to the top of the list, rather the bottom of the list. Promotion, that's another big category. What am I going to do to promote my book? Because most publishing houses want to know. And then about the author, which is pretty self-explanatory. So I'll give you a little bit of insight into how this all went down. After I had submitted my proposal and both the letter and the book proposal to the U of A Press, and the acquisitions editor was interested in it, I then had to complete the manuscript. So once the manuscript was complete, I submitted it to the U of A Press. The acquisitions editor got a couple of readers. The readers did reports. These would have been subject experts. They did reports. The reports were given back to me. I made some changes, and I submitted it back to the U of A Press. A couple of other readers were asked to take a look at it, and they generated more reports. And I was asked to make, at that point it was pretty minor changes, so I did. Then it went to the board, and it was approved. And then I had a contract, basically. I didn't really at that point have much to dicker with, so I was given a contract and I signed it. Then we started the editing process. So I was assigned a project editor, which would have been, you might call him a project manager or project lead, as well as a copy editor. And so I worked with that copy editor really quite closely. I did a lot of work on it. Definitely wasn't just a matter of giving it over to the copy editor. It was a long collaborative process. Then once the copy edit was done, the designer took over. He did a beautiful job on designing it, and then we went through the proofreading process, and I was involved in that as well. U of A Press was great for letting me be involved with the editing at those times. And so I was involved with that whole thing throughout. At some point, I was asked by the board, the press board, to change the title. I had thought I would call it A Light in the Warm Heart of Africa. Light referring to the light of education, and Warm Heart of Africa being kind of a nickname for the country. So full of symbolism, and I thought that would be a lovely title. Not everyone agreed with me. Some people had a concern that it might be associated too much with the Christian missionary movement. And so I was asked to come up with something else. And I remember at the time I was asked to do it like yesterday. So I felt a lot of pressure. And I remember going into the office and mentioning it to a couple of my colleagues. And I want to say here that Timothy Anderson was just wonderful with helping me with that. It's something that Timothy has always been really good about. Whenever I've needed help with something, it doesn't matter how busy he is, he will always step up to the plate and help. I remember that day sitting down and brainstorming with him and coming up with some ideas, and then I had to go teach, and then I came back thinking that he would have been on to something else because he was very busy. And no, he'd come up with some potential titles, and we talked about them, and we did some tweaking, and Weaving a Malawi Sunrise was born. And so the takeaway for me with that is writing a book of this kind takes a lot of people. There's the writer, yes, and yes, I put the vast majority of work into this book, but I could never have done it without an enormous amount of help from dozens and dozens and dozens of people. The Malawians were absolutely fantastic, the ones that I worked with. The editing team at U of A Press was fantastic. I would say that there were a couple of Canadians that were less than fully supportive. Not very many, one or two. And I guess the takeaway that I have from that is that you will never be able to please everyone with these kinds of projects. I think that as writers, we must develop a tough skin. That's a hard thing for most people, but it's true. And it's particularly true for writers of this genre. I have never worked on a project in this genre that didn't create some sort of controversy, and yet I never set out to be controversial. So make friends, develop a support system with other writers. This is vitally important to really succeed within this genre, I think, and particularly now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to answer them. Just a quick note, I did require permissions for this book. It was something that I hadn't thought of before. I had gotten verbal permissions, but I actually required written permissions. This is the case often for university presses, less so for other presses, but something that you might want to consider, especially if you're thinking about writing a book that includes a lot of other people's words. Memoir is a little bit less so, but for any writing that includes other people's words, you will likely require permissions.